Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to How to Get Hired. I'm Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to adjust my camera brightness right out of the gate. Here we go. There we go. Something a bit more normal, shall we say, more usual. Perfect. And this one too. This is the weekly live stream where it's a live interactive Q&A session with me. So this is your big opportunity to ask me questions. And the topic of today, this is the 143rd episode of How to Get Hired. And the title of this episode is, Why Did You Leave Your Last Job? Best Answer. So we're going to be talking about that right off the hop. And as always, this is a live Q&A. So if you are a subscriber to my channel and you have been so for any amount of time, and you are seeing my face in a video feed, somewhere near the video feed, there should be a chat box. Get in the chat box. Let me know what you're wondering about, what you're struggling with, and I will do my best to help you out. That's the whole point of these. So, yeah, a shout out goes out, as always, to my YouTube channel members. You guys are awesome. And also my Patreons and my super thanks donors. Those are always nice to get. And you, my viewers and participants. You guys are awesome. And I have been experimenting with messing around with the settings on my streaming software, and I'm trying to get all the widgets and stuff working again so you guys can see the live feed here on the screen in that little blue rectangle there, the view count and the actual comments. It looks like it's starting to work, so that's great. I'm going to try and implement that over the next couple of streams that I do. So, yeah, excellent. So, welcome. Okay, Serge is here. Says, hello, Bill. Hello, Serge. Thank you, Serge. Thank you for being here, or Sergey, whatever you go by. Let's get down to it. While we are waiting for the chat questions to roll in, let's talk about the title here. Why did you leave your last job? Best answer. This is one of the standard job interview questions. They've been asking this since time immemorial. Okay, you probably will get asked this question in some form. Excuse me. When you go to a job interview, this is the past question. Usually they ask you a future question, like where do you see yourself in 5 years? They also ask you a past question, like why did you leave your last job, right? Now, this question, how you answer it, it's going to vary depending on what your situation is, right? So usually the way you break it down is there's three sort of answers depending on if you were laid off, that's how your last job came to an end, or you left voluntarily, that's another possibility. Or you were let go, right? You were fired or you were terminated with cause, any of those things, right? So you've got like sort of three answers that you can give. Excuse me. I think there's a bug going around and I have it, is what I suspect. So I apologize if I'm coughing and hacking on the air. Yeah, so this question is always, there's always like a trick question. You know, they don't ask these questions so that you can easily rig them, game them, give an artificial good answer. They ask them because they're trying to peel away the layers and essentially get the dirt on you. When you come down to a job interview or you do a virtual job interview, they've selected you. On paper, you look pretty good. You look fully qualified. You look like you have potential, right? And it's a process of elimination for the recruiter or the hiring manager. They start with sometimes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applicants, right? And their job is essentially to whittle that down to one that they offer the job to. So as we go down this process, they're eliminating people and they're looking for things to, for which to eliminate you. So what better way than to ask a bunch of probing questions about possibly negative things and then have you say the negative things and they go, okay, there's a reason to eliminate you. And if they're looking for reasons, you've just handed them one on the plate. So that's what this question is for, basically. just like a lot of questions, when you think about it, why would they really care what you did in your last job? Why is that relevant? It shouldn't be relevant. It has no bearing at all to this job, right? Well, they're doing it to see if they can find any negative things about you. Because the idea is that if you've acted a certain way in the past, they can make the assumption, oh, that's the type of person you are, and it's likely, therefore, that you will act that way in the future at this job if we hire you. Right? That's the implication. So the problem is that if you're a fine, upstanding person, okay, and you're the perfect employee, you do everything perfectly. You never make any mistakes. You never do anything silly. You follow all the rules, and you are absolutely awesome, right? But as we all know, some employers out there are less than savory, shall we say, and you could be a perfect employee, but a situation could just not work out through no fault of your own, right? And so, maybe you weren't suited to that work, right? You're a perfect employee, but they hired you on the basis that your job would be a certain thing, and then you start working there, and then you find that, no, they've changed the job into something else, and that's not really why you signed on for it, right? So it could just not work out, and you decide to leave, right? You could be laid off because you're the junior employee. Absolutely no fault of yours, right? It's no kind of statement about, who you are as a person or what your potential is or your propensity to work out, right? It has absolutely nothing to do with that. You're just a victim of circumstance, random chance. You were the last employee that just happened to be hired before the company hit some financial difficulties, and so they laid you off first. Absolutely no bearing on you, right? Okay. And then we also know, right? Nobody likes to admit this, but we also know that you could be a perfect employee, and through the employer being bad, having bad managers, bad supervisors, etc., they can end up firing perfectly good employees, not because of any fault of the employee, but because of a fault with them, right? So they could fire a perfectly good employee, and it looks bad for the employee now that they have this on their record, right? So when they go to their next job interview, for example, and somebody says, why did you leave your last job? You have to say, well, I was fired, right? And it looks bad, even though you did absolutely nothing wrong. You're a perfect employee, right? So this is the problem. We all know this, okay? None of this is a reflection on you necessarily, but they're asking you the question anyway, because what they're going to do is they're going to make assumptions about you based on what you say. If you left or if you were fired, certainly they're going to make assumptions about you. That's the whole point of asking this question, right? So here's what you do. If you were laid off, usually there's no harm in saying this. You just say, well, the company was downsizing, and because I was the junior employee, I was laid off without cause, right? Not based on my performance or anything I did. It was just they were having financial difficulties, and they were laying off employees, and that's why I left that job, right? And usually no harm. Now, what you can do is if you were laid off with a bunch of other people at the same time, it's usually good to say that, because that's even more evidence that there's nothing wrong with you, right? It was just the company was downsizing, right? And that word downsizing is a good way of describing it. On the other hand, if you weren't laid off, but you voluntarily left, okay, that's kind of the second scenario. Now it gets into more of a gray area, because although there's nothing inherently wrong with leaving a company, what you don't want these people to think is that, oh, you're the type of person that leaves things, right? Because if they get that impression of you, they will make the assumption that they shouldn't hire you for this job because you're the type of person that leaves things. It's a good job, but you get bored very easily or something, and then you just decide to leave because it's not exciting anymore, right? Or whatever, reasoning, you're the type of person who leaves, right? So generally, it's okay to say that you left, but you have to be careful because you don't want them to make that assumption about you. Okay? Now, a good blanket, answer is to sort of, the good thing to do here is to back up your answer. Don't just say, well, I decided to leave, right? Because then they're left to guess as to what your reasoning is and what, and are you just the type of person that leaves things? Now, if you give them an actual understandable reason, sometimes that can help. You say, like, listen, I signed on for a certain role, and I'm quite interested in fulfilling that role, and I'm quite talented at fulfilling that role. However, what I found is that over time, that role, the role that I signed on for, it quickly morphed into something else. The company changed, my duties, they changed my responsibility, they changed my area, and it turned into something that really, really didn't speak to my interest. It wasn't just a minor tweak. It was like a completely different job in a different area, something like that. That would be understandable, right? Now, a certain amount of flex, you got to be careful here because, the expectation is that if you take a job, you should be flexible to a degree. You sign on for a job and they have the perfect right to tweak things here and there, as stuff changes, right? That's not an unreasonable situation, right? But if they completely change the job, if you sign on, you're working as an accountant and they put you in the sales department, now you're having to do sales. It's like, that's a completely different job. That's kind of a shift. So in that case, it's more understandable. So if you can say something like that, then you can explain, and then they go, okay, you're not a person who leaves things. That was just a strange situation where they changed the job on you to an unreasonable degree. So, okay, fair enough, right? So if you voluntarily left, it's usually okay to say that, but you should probably give a bit of an explanation so they don't make that assumption about you, okay? The third and final situation that you could be in here is if you were fired from your previous job, okay? If you were terminated, they said, get the hell out, you're fired, or it was something where they intentionally moved you out of the company. They did it more strategically. They said there's all kinds of shenanigans people can play where they eliminate your job. They change your job strategically, intentionally so that you will leave, stuff like that, right? If that's you, now we have some problems here because if you are in a job interview and they ask you, why did you leave your last job? And you say, well, I was fired. The problem is they're going to be making certain assumptions about you. That's the whole point of asking this question. You're the type of person that gets fired from jobs. Therefore, we probably shouldn't offer you this job because you're the type of person that tends to get fired. We might not have all the details, but we have the results are in and you've been fired. So there's a higher likelihood, all things being equal, that you will end up being fired from this job if we hire you, right? This is their reasoning. Right? It's just so everybody knows, when you deal with recruiters and to a lesser degree hiring managers, when you're making a first impression and they don't know who you are, they're going to use this principle. Past behavior predicts future behavior. That's a major underlying principle of how recruitment and selection is taught today to recruiters when they learn, how to be a recruiter. That's a principle that's taught to them. And that's the underlying principle of things like behavioral-based questions, which are very popular. Like they're asking you questions about your past. Why would they care about your past? They don't care about what you did with some other company. The reason they're asking you about it is because if you behaved a certain way there, they're making the assumption, rightly or wrongly, that that is how you are going to behave if they were to hire you and put you in that situation again, right? So that's why they're asking these questions, like, why did you leave your last job? Because if you say I got fired, they're going to go, okay, you're the type of person that gets fired. So if we were to hire you, there's a good chance that we'd have to fire you from this job too. for some reason, you rub employers the wrong way, right? So, what do we do if that's why we left our last job? We were fired from it, and they ask us this question. Here's what I recommend. Don't say you were fired. It's very simple, because saying that is essentially the kiss of death. Okay? This is the unfortunate situation, right? Now, I'm not saying to lie. I never say to lie. What I am saying is I'm pointing out that a job interview is not a court of law, nor is it a deposition. We always tell the truth, but we don't always disclose everything, right? We can decide what information we're comfortable sharing with these people and what we aren't, okay? So if they say, why did you leave your last job? My recommendation is to say, well, I was ready to do more. And usually, that's not a lie. That's the truth. You know what I mean? So that's what I'd recommend you answer. Because the problem is they're judging you based on an assumption, based on incomplete information, and you are countering that, right? So that's what I would say. So they say, why do you leave your last job? You say, I was ready to do more. And then what you can do is you can speak to the strengths of what you're looking for. You're saying, that job, it kind of involved this and that, which is fine, but I feel I'm ready to move into this area, that area, do something that involves more of this, more of that, right? You're looking towards the future, right? And coincidentally, if what you're saying about what you want to do more of lines up with this job, which it should, ideally, you seem like a perfect fit. So that's a good way of taking that question, deflecting the obvious, poison pill that this question is, and using it as a platform to talk about how you're a fit and communicate that. So that's what I would say you should handle this question. Why did you leave your last job? That's what I consider to be the best answer for it. Okay, let's get to you guys. The Admiral is here. The Admiral says, based on your experience, what is the most overlooked factor that determines a candidate's success in job interviews, and how can someone leverage it effectively? It's very simple. Likability. People tend to hire people they like. It's just that simple. It's not based on your qualifications. It's not based on anything really substantial. It's based on how much they like you, right? Now, what enables a person to be likable? Well, there's several factors in there. One are your soft skills, okay? Learning a little bit of personal charisma, learning a bit of manners, learning a bit of etiquette protocol, saying please, and thank you. And, they bring you in there. You say, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. Stuff like that. People they like hearing that, right? You yourself like hearing that when you meet someone, they say, oh, thank you for inviting me. It's decency, manners, etiquette. That's definitely a factor, right? Another component is like first of all the other soft skills like communication skills, things like this. But another big chunk of it is a big factor is the other person, right? They will have a certain personality type, a certain background, certain opinions, this kind of thing, a certain perspective. Now, if you are similar, you have a similar personality or a similar background or similar opinions or a similar perspective, people tend to like others that are like themselves, right? That's just human nature. That's how we all are, right? Now, when you learn business and you learn, things like a lot of soft skills, communication skills, a huge part of those are learning how to, communicate with people who are not exactly like you, right? Maybe I'm a raging introvert, somebody's a raging extrovert. I'm like, I don't know, what's the most introverted job in the world? Somebody who works by themselves all day in a little room, doing math or something, and they love it, right? it's heaven to them. And then the raging extrovert, they're like a outside salesperson, like talking to everyone. They've got the gift of gab. It takes really advanced communication skills to be able to communicate seamlessly between those people, right? And then not misconstrue what they say, not read into what they're saying, to have good collaboration skills so that these people want to deal with each other. That takes pretty advanced soft skills, right? But if you get two like introverts together, usually they get along pretty well. You get two extroverts together, usually they get along pretty well, right? And so on. Okay, so likability is the thing, and that's based on several underlying things, right? Some of which you have control over, some of which you don't, right? A lot of it depends on the other person, and their perspective on things. So, you know what I mean? So that's the single most important thing in a job interview. That's the whole point of job interviews. It appears on the outside that it's about qualifications. It's not. That was the job application. That was the application stage where they cared about on paper, are you qualified to do this job, right? If you ever stop to wonder, why would they then need to bring you in person to talk to you? Doesn't that seem unnecessary? They have all the information they need about your qualifications, or they could send you a questionnaire if they need more. You know what I mean? It's because they want to know who you are as a person, right? It turns out in reality that a lot of those kind of soft things, like who you are as a person, that's what actually makes the difference between a great employee and a terrible employee. Those are the things that end up mattering in the real world, right? So that's what job interviews are about. And that's how people generally do this. They hire the people that they like the best. So everything you can learn about being likable, just going in there and smiling and be pleasant and, things like this, that really, really helps. It's stupid, but that's the world we live in. That's the reality. So hopefully that helps. That's a great question, the Admiral. Stanislav says, well, but what if the real reason was downsizing? Well, I did address that. Okay, that's if you were laid off. That was the first thing I said. So go back and check that. Alex Roska says, what if last company really made firings? What? Well, I did address if you were fired, right? So once again, I did address that. Azam says, long time no see. Good to see you, Bill. Well, same to you, Azam. Welcome back. Where have you been? If you have any questions, let me know. Sky says, I love that answer. Ready to do more. Yeah, it's a great catch-all. Like this is the stupid thing. It's really annoying that job interviews are about this stuff. And I get that. That was very much my reaction like decades ago when I was first having to do this. It's stupid, it's cosmetic, it's wordplay, but the reason why that's the case is because you're making a first impression, right? It's not about who you are really. It's about, I've never met you before. I've got 1 minute to sort of figure out who you are and make a judgment. So what are you going to present to me first that I'm going to now use to make a judgment about you? Right? And the perfect analogy for me, I don't know if you guys, what you guys think of this, but the perfect analogy is, I remember the days of like cable TV. I know that they're over, but I'm not sure what the replacement is. I guess the replacement is things like scrolling, on your phone, right? Like if you're scrolling through TikTok or YouTube Shorts or or something like, and like you're making a judgment about, is this worth getting into? Is this worth my time to watch this video or whatever? And how much of it do you watch? You watch the first couple of seconds, right? And if you're not really liking what you see, you just go next and you keep scrolling, right? That's kind of like what's happening in a job interview, right? They're looking at applications. Does this hold their interest? No, they're not seeing the things they want. Okay, they don't pursue it any further, right? And then if you pass the application stage, then you get to the interview stage. Same thing, you've got half an hour or whatever it is to make a good impression. They have no idea who you are. They have no idea what you're like as an employee. They have no idea, like, are they seeing the real you, or are they seeing a sort of facade, or like what do you call it? Like an image, a mask that you put on, you know what I mean? And what they're doing is they're saying, like, okay, based on my initial impressions of this person, we're going to decide if we're going to pursue them further, or we're going to just end it here, right? So, you may be a fine, upstanding person, right? But everyone has negative aspects to them. We're not all geniuses. We haven't done everything perfect. You know what I'm saying? And we're not, like, everything about us isn't super interesting. You know what I mean? So what do you choose to present when you only have, like, 1 minute, 2 minutes, half an hour to make an impression? If you lead with all the things about you that are boring, stories about how you failed, showing your limitations, talking about your failures, like, you're not going to make a good impression. And what they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, I'm out. I don't want to investigate you anymore, right? So it's not that you said anything dishonest, and it's not that you presented anything that everybody else doesn't have, like you were noticeably inferior. You weren't. Everybody has failures. Everybody has, awkward stories from their past. Everybody has, weaknesses, etc. Right? You're not any worse than anybody else. But the thing is, you had, like, only a tiny little amount of time to make them interested enough to want to look longer and harder at you, right? And so that's why when you go to a job interview, it isn't necessarily about being super, super authentic. I know a lot of technically minded people that they take this attitude that, when you go to a job interview, the first thing you should do is, like, okay, let's be honest here, just so that, this doesn't come up later. I want to put it all out on the table. I don't do this. I don't do that. Here's a failure of mine. Here's a failure of mine. Here's a weakness of mine. Here's another weakness of mine. And here's a strange, weird opinion I have that you probably don't share. Okay. So now that I've cleared the air and I've put all that out on the table, right, let's get to it. And they're shocked to find that the other party says, oh, I'm sorry, we're not moving forward with you. You know what I'm saying? It's like you had great intentions. You had a desire to be honest and just to keep it real and to be helpful. And then that got you eliminated, right? So on the surface, it feels like a very unfair, stupid process. But what's actually going on is you're making a first impression. You have to lead with your strengths. Make them interested enough that they're going to look at you a little bit deeper, And then you have a chance of getting the job. That's the idea. Alex says, or you could say company-made firings, which is the truth. Yeah, I did address that, and I did say exactly that. Although with slightly better grammar. Sky says, great news, but then I feel they should give us personality tests, although that's another box to check for positive or negative. Well, yeah, but then what do you do with it? Okay, so you're an introvert. Is that good? Is that bad? Who's to say that, like, say a job as a accountant or a developer, in order to get that job, you must be an introvert? Who's to say that? There are some really, really interesting and cool extroverted accountants out there. And in my experience, I've met some pretty damn amazing introverted salespeople. People that kick ass because they're introverts. They're selling to introverts. Do you think introverts want to deal with some, like, fast talking, deal making, kind of extroverted person. No, they want to deal with like a nice, calm, technical person that can explain the technical aspects of the product, right? So you get some amazing introverted salespeople. So I'm just making a point, Sky. You're not saying anything weird or stupid. I'm just illustrating. Suppose they gave you a personality test. What do you do with that information? Do you then say, oh, the only person that can be in this job has to be someone with this personality? That's really limiting. You know what I mean? A lot of people would argue that like you shouldn't hire based on things like personality. It's a judgment call. And it does kind of go against this very trendy thing of diversity. Diversity of personalities, diversity of backgrounds, diversity of, experiences. What we found by studying business over the last 100 years, what we found is that, if you want to maximize your profit, you have a diverse workforce. And I don't mean all the politically trendy stuff like ethnicity and like, what is it? They care about ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about diversity of skill sets, backgrounds, personalities, work styles, communication styles, right? Who's to say that, if you want to be an accountant, you must have only ever had jobs as an accountant before. Why can't you have a career where you start out as a salesperson, then you become a lion tamer for 5 years, then you become a polar explorer, and then you take your accounting certification and then you work as an accountant? Who's to say that won't give you an edge? There are some people that have all these strange kind of combinations that really kick ass, That's also one of the reasons why job interviews kind of suck, because they want to pigeonhole people and they have this very specific idea of what's good when it's usually diluted. Okay, Marina says, Bill, is it possible to have excellent communication skills with an intermediate level of English? Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I'm not a linguist or anything or an English type person, but communication is more than just like understanding words. You know what I mean? Like it's also about the concepts. For example, the communication process, and this is pretty obvious if you're dealing with somebody who is not speaking their first language, right? There might be some language barriers there, right? You would know that the communication process doesn't just involve you talking at somebody, right? It means if you want to make sure that they received the message that you transmitted, that you were trying to send, right? A great sanity check is to get them to repeat. Now, like, what did you understand? And if you start doing this, you realize that a lot of what you say to people is not being communicated properly, right? So that's a concept that has nothing to do that's independent of language, right? It's independent of what language you speak. For example, body language, right? Like we all know that if you say to somebody, I had a great time. What's the message you're receiving? You're probably receiving the message, oh, Bill had a great time. If I say, yeah, I had a great time, what message are you receiving there? You're probably receiving the message, Bill did not have a great time, even though it's the same words, right? Or what if I typed an email to you I had a great time, period. What message did you receive there, right? These are concepts that are independent of what language you speak. So if you understand a lot of that kind of stuff, just because you might not have a high level of the language you're speaking, you could still be a good communicator. I would suspect. I don't know what CBL 6 is. I'm not like, as I said, I'm not like an English language expert. But I think the principle holds up, at least to me in my mind. The Admiral says, I can't agree enough with you on the importance of social skills. As an introvert, I've held several jobs, But working as a hotel receptionist truly taught me to communicate confidently with anyone. Well, that's great, the Admiral. This is why some experience in like hotel management or hotel administration might be a really good thing on your resume if you're going for seemingly unrelated jobs. You know what I'm saying? You know? Although I suspect that a lot of recruiters don't see it that way. And that's why I can say, thank God, that recruiters aren't put in charge of selecting people. At the end of the day, it's hiring managers, and a lot of times sanity sort of prevails sometimes with hiring managers. But you agree with me, so you're obviously a fine, upstanding person with great taste. So thank you, Admiral. Sky Craving says, another thing that I find irritating is because I've been doing some applications that ask how many jobs have I worked or left in the last 5 years. 2020 was a crazy year and I worked contract jobs. Yeah, like that's the thing. You see, the problem, if you guys haven't figured this out, let me explain. If you're dealing with recruiters, right? The way you get accepted by a recruiter is if you fit into a nice little box, right? The mainstream thing that they're looking for. What's the first question out of their mouths when you apply for a job? You apply for a job, they say, how many years experience do you have doing this, right? The implication being that if you've never done it before, how could you possibly be any good at it? Or how could you possibly be qualified, right? Now that alone is complete BS. We all know this, right? If you're a very intelligent, very capable, hardworking person, you know that, like, you know, a lot of jobs aren't rocket science, and just because you haven't done something before doesn't mean that within a couple of days you can't, you know, learn everything you need to learn to really do the job and kick ass in it, excel in it. You know, do you need someone that's been in that job for 35 years to do it right? No. Is the person that's been in the job 35 years necessarily going to be better than you when you've only been doing it for 6 months? No. You know, we know this. Right? What if you had a diverse, meandering career, right? You worked like our good friend here that worked in hotel administration, the Admiral. You know, you did that for a few years, and then you took your accounting certification, and now you're getting a job as an accountant, right? Well, maybe the whole hotel administration experience showed you the value of having a rapport with different types of people and being able to communicate in a very positive way with people. And you saw how valuable that was, you know, and how it made your job easier and how it got you ahead, right? Do you think most accountants have had that experience? Well, I can tell you, having worked with many of them over the years, no, they haven't. I don't think there's any other place where I've seen, like, you know, a more reasonably intelligent, highly educated person that does something valuable, quite valuable, who just doesn't understand that you have to be nice to people, you know? You know, people that, like, maybe in education, that's the only other place I think I've seen people like that, where they, you know, they're in kindergarten when it comes to, like, how to deal with people, you know, how to interact with people. You know, they think that, oh, the way anything gets done is like, I dictate to you. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you the rules. You're going to listen to me, because who wouldn't want to? And then I'm just going to do everything you say. And then that's how we're going to get along. You know, it's like, what? You know, that does not happen in the real world with most people, you know, but in an accountant's mind, that's how the world works. And they operate as if that's the world they're living in, and it doesn't usually go the way they want. So, you know what I'm saying? This way of valuing people, where you say, okay, how many years of experience do you have? That's the number one thing. That's very flimsy, you know? Jenia says 29 minutes in. Nice. Okay, well, hopefully that means that you're happy that you've been here for 29 minutes and not that you showed up and there's a problem. Sky says, correction on word above, contract work. Contract work. I want to make sure that you don't misunderstand me when I say this. For the good of us all. No, I got that. Jenia says, I took those assessments online for an employer. I think they are measuring your ability to operate in an online environment. Yes, or let me throw something else out at you. What we find is that a lot of the reasons that they give you assessments that they didn't create themselves, they're a standard assessment. A lot of the times it's so that they can cover their butt. If they were to hire you and you didn't work out, you quit after a week, that could be very embarrassing for them. Their professional reputation could be on line. The boss involves the recruiter in the hiring process. The recruiter recommends a candidate. The boss says, okay, you're the professional, so sure, fine, I guess. They seemed okay. So the boss ends up saying, fine, let's hire that person. That person starts. They do a terrible job. They quit after a week, right? In a big like spectacle, right? Do you think the boss is going to trust that recruiter's recommendations going forward? No. It's very embarrassing for the recruiter, right? So in order to cover their butt, they'll say, hey, we put them through all the standard tests and they passed. Not my fault, You see how that works? Very flimsy. You see a lot of that. I'm not saying that's what necessarily was happening here. What I am saying is that's a very prominent concept out there. Jania, the Texas workforce has 3 to 4 locations in which one can use the computer, take classes, work on your resume and interviewing skills, as well as take a typing test. Oh, is that like a company or something? The Texas workforce? Okay. Marina says, thank you so much, Bill. Congratulations on your amazing work. You really helped me. Well, thank you, Marina. That's very kind of you to say. And I'm really glad that you're doing okay and things seem to be happening for you. So right on. You deserve 100% of the credit because you did it. That's great. Never stop learning and never. And what's more important is to have a respect for different things. When I was young, I like pretty much almost everybody in their 20s, I thought I knew it all while simultaneously knowing pretty much nothing about the world. I'd never done anything. I'd never seen anything, but yet I knew exactly what needed to be done to solve the world's problems, right? And then, in your 30s, you if you're a typical 30-year-old, you get crushed and defeated and you fail, right? And then you start to open your mind a little to the fact that, well, maybe I don't know it all, right? And I should maybe open my eyes and my ears and start actually observing and listening and seeing how things actually work, right? So part of getting hired is, especially for young people, and I know because I see lots of comments from job seekers and things, is about like, trying to open your mind and really understand people and how they make judgments and how they assess things. It's not all a conspiracy. They're not this evil empire, that you might think they are. But there's a lot of concepts going on. There's a lot of reasons why things are done the way they are. There's a hell of a lot of stupidity and inefficiency, but there are reasons behind it. They expose the failings that a lot of us we all ourselves have. So it's a tremendous learning opportunity, and the people that tend to be successful at this are the ones that don't come in with a chip on the shoulder. They try and suppress that a little, and really try and understand what's going on, whether it seems fair to them or not. They really try and see that, So the people that are successful, like Marina, I would suspect, have kind of overcome that. They've crossed the anger bridge. Let's keep it at that. Abdullah says, hello, I applied for a graduate software engineer role and took an online exam and passed. And next week I have an HR interview. Can you tell me some questions they could ask? Well, you can find that out pretty simply. Here's what you do, Abdullah. If I'm saying your name right, I'm sure I'm not. Okay, so here's what you can do and what I recommend that you do. This is ChatGPT, just in case you don't know. You've never used it. Some people haven't used it. Some people have. Incredible tool. Is it the be-all, end-all? No. No, it isn't. There's a lot of flaws with it, but what does OpenAI promote it as? They say it's got PhD level reasoning. I would take exception to that. I think that this thing has, this thing says, oh, there's 5 reasons, and then prints 6 for you. It makes a lot of mistakes, but it's a useful tool. There are many other tools like this. Use them. Now, let me show you something, Abdullah. Okay, so I applied for a graduate software engineering role and took an exam online and passed next week. I have an interview. What are some of the questions that they could ask me in that job interview? Okay. You can do this with Google, by the way. This is just a little more tailored to what you want. Okay, so here's what you can expect. So they can ask you some technical questions, I suppose. They can always ask technical questions. Okay, especially for coding and stuff, all this kind of stuff. But now we get to actual traditional job interview questions. Let's see here. They don't actually go into a ton of it, but company-specific questions. Do some research on the company, okay? So you know who they are, you know what they do, you know like where their head office is, you know, stuff like that, right? Okay. This is not an ideal answer, actually, but okay, it does talk about behavioral questions. Okay, so behavioral questions are one of the types of things they can ask you. That's where you answer a question with a personal story from your past, right? You're telling a story from your past. That means everybody will be giving a different answer to the same question, right? They could say, tell me about a time that you failed when you were trying to create an app and you later solved the problem or figured out what the problem was using creativity. Tell me a time that happened, right? So you would have your own unique story that's different from anybody else's story, right? That's the idea, okay? So what you need to do is go and learn about how you prepare for behavioral questions. The interesting thing about behavioral questions is that there's an infinite number of them that they could ask you. Like literally, I could make up like exotic ones off the top of my head. I could say, tell me about a time that, you had, a real rivalry with one of your peers that pushed you to go above and beyond to complete a task. And in so doing, you realize something new about your job and yourself. Tell me about a time that happened to you, right? Go. There's a behavioral question for you, right? Now, did you have an answer prepared for that? No, you didn't, right? So the way you prepare for behavioral questions is you do it backwards. You sort of think up 10 stories, like a nice sort of diverse collection of stories. Usually maybe 5 of your biggest wins, the time where you succeeded in your job or whatever, you were recognized for it. And then 5 other things like failures or, disputes with your boss, dispute with your coworker, conflict, right? Things like this. And then you prepare these. You practice telling them in a very compact format. The STAR format is quite popular. There are others, though. And then you sort of vet your answers. You make sure that, the story you're telling, that's what you would do today if they put you in that situation again, right? And it is the right way of doing it. So, you make sure that your answers are vetted and they pass these tests. Then you practice saying them in a very compact way. You should be able to tell the story ideally in 45 seconds, right? STAR, situation, task, action, result. It was 2 years ago. I was working in this role. I was given a task of doing this. Here's what I did. I did this and this, and here's how it turned out. we got this, and, the boss was happy and they commended me publicly and they gave me a promotion because of how I handled it. The end. Very compact, right? And you pull out one of those 10 stories to answer any behavioral question they could possibly throw at you, the one that, sort of matches it the most closely, right? And then you might tweak it a little, depending on what exactly they asked you. And that's how you prepare for behavioral interview questions. They're also going to be asking you standard job interview questions. I don't think this really went into that. Like things like, tell me about yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Why did you leave your last job? How do you handle stress? And do you have any questions for us? Here, I will show you another one here. Okay, so what are the standard job interview questions that people can expect in pretty much every job interview in some way, shape, or form? Let's just see what it says. You could use Google or anything else for this too. So here you go. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? That's essentially the same question as this. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Very, very dangerous question, right? Why did you leave your last job? That's what we talked about earlier on the stream. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? That's the future question, right? Tell me about a time when you faced a challenge at work and how you, that's a behavioral question. Tell me about a time, right? How do you handle stress? Just for the reference, if anybody ever asks you that in a job interview, you just say, I handle stress very well. And then you shut the hell up. And you let them continue to the next question. Why should we hire you? That's also another form of this. What are your strengths and why do you want to work? It's all the same question. Okay. Now, this is not a standard interview question. How do you prioritize your work? That's more topical. Okay. These are now it's going into these are not standard questions. These are just things they could ask, I suppose, but they're not standard. Okay. So anyway, this is a great tool. If you're just starting out, you got questions like you have about the basics, start with ChatGPT, start doing your basic research. I have a lot of videos that cover specific questions and things like that are a little more sophisticated than this. And you follow those, practice your answers, like memorizing them and then repeating them. And then to give yourself an edge, practice with another person. A lot of people skip that step to their peril. If you skip that step, you end up making all your rookie mistakes in actual job interviews where you blow the job to learn a lesson. You could avoid that. You could learn all the lessons at home and not make those rookie mistakes in an actual job interview. You could do that by practicing with someone else. Get them to pretend to be an interviewer and to ask you questions and you answer them. It's like you're simulating what it's going to be like. And if it feels awkward, that's good because that's a simulation of what the actual interview is going to feel like. And remember, practice makes perfect. You do a whole bunch of those, you're going to get comfortable, you're going to get confident, you're going to be able to interview like a champ. So hopefully that helps. Sky says, you speak the truth about the varied work history and the ability to pivot. I got a different screen. Let's try a different screen here. Let's see. You speak the truth about the varied work history and the ability to pivot and try something new. For non-linear, it's best to go straight to hiring managers as recruiters bind to multi-ability. I didn't really get that last thing you said, but you're certainly correct about the first 2/3 of that for sure. You're absolutely correct. I like people that have a diverse skill set. They have a broad skill set. They've got broad work experiences. They haven't just done one thing their whole life. They've seen other ways of doing things. They've seen other environments, and they bring all of that with them. That's not just particular to me. That a lot of hiring managers feel like that. They want employees that are worldly, employees that have, regardless of what your job is, you have a little bit of experience dealing with customers, a little bit of experience, with a very regimented professional thing. You have a little bit of experience dealing with a sort of faster paced, looser kind of environment. Like, you can bring all of those ways of operating to this job depending on what's most appropriate in the moment, There's someone that their handle is "Stop it." I always think of the British way of saying that. Stop it. I can't do the voice, but sort of Cumbrian, like Northern English kind of. Stop it. How can a person over 55 get hired? Well, there's one sure way a person over 55 can get hired, and that's by talking to a hiring manager who themselves are over 55. If anybody's not going to hold it against you that you're over 55, it's someone who's 55. You know what I'm saying? If you're being interviewed by a 21-year-old, it's going to be hard for them to really see the value in being 55, right? But that's how ageism works, right? It's like you get ageism the other way too. You get a lot of 21-year-olds that people don't want to hire because, you're too young. What could you possibly know, right? That's the attitude of the 65-year-old, right? Well, you want to get hired by you want to be hired when you're 21, and you don't want anyone to have a problem with the fact that you're 21. Go to a place where the hiring manager is 21. I guarantee you, they're not going to hold it against you that you're 21, right? I know that's it seems silly on the face of it, but it's true. It's true. As people get older, a very general trend is they tend to move up, right? To some degree. We start out down here, we end up somewhere higher than here, usually. Not always, but usually, right? Nor do you have to, but I'm just saying that is a natural progression. So that means that the people you're hiring with, the hiring managers, they tend to be older, I've met like 75-year-olds that are making hiring decisions. You know what I mean? So, always remember that. If you go to a place where, you're going through recruiters and they have like some 21-year-old recruiter and you're 55, and they don't have a clue what they're doing or what they're talking about, and they've already made snap judgments against you, by the fact that you're old. So they think, you're old, therefore you're going to have problems relating to young people. Not always true. You're going to push back against learning new things. Not always true. You're going to have less energy than younger people, even when you're excited about something. Not always true. Right? They judge you based on a stereotype. That's what recruiters do. So you can solve that problem and every other problem by going around recruiters and talking directly to hiring managers. Right? You might have to reach out to hiring managers. Learn how to get informational interviews where you sit down with people and get information from them, ask them about their job. Usually that can be a very flattering thing for them. They end up loving you. And then they also see that, hey, you know your stuff. And that can open quite a lot of doors. Okay, so learn about that. Learn about informational interviews. That's a great thing to have in your back pocket. It can get around ageism. It can get around changing careers. It can get around work gaps. It can get around a variety of different issues that are not really issues. They only feel like issues because recruiters have a problem with them. Northern Nomad says, it's always fun telling prospective job interviewers, recruiters, or hiring managers when they ask, why did you leave last job that you were just laid off, but instead it was a conflict of interest? Okay. Makes sense. Peter says, thank you for all the valuable tips you keep sharing with your audience. I work in employment for newcomers here in Winnipeg. In Winnipeg, you're a fellow Winnipegger. I'm in Winnipeg too. And I love the way you present the information. It's so helpful. Well, thank you very much. I don't think I've ever talked to somebody who identified as being from Winnipeg, ever. What does that say about us? Peter, what does that say about us? We must be a pretty sad bunch. It's the whole Winnipegosis thing. Peter says, I'd love to get your MBA course, Bill. Well, thank you. If it aligns with your goals and it serves your purpose, yeah. I created it because I think it's criminal how a lot of like universities in particular, they're almost like gatekeeping this knowledge. This material, this knowledge has been in the public domain for a very long time. Nobody owns it. It's out there. But if you want to learn it, they charge you insane amounts of money. You're paying like 5 figures American, equivalent. It's like you shouldn't need that. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're somebody who just wants to like start your own business, you want to learn business so you can apply the principles, or you want to learn business so that you could excel in your job, or they want to promote you into a management role, but you're a little nervous because you're a technical expert in your technical field, but you don't know a lot about managing. You just want to learn a bit about managing. You'd love to go back to business school, but you're not going to take 2 years off and pay $50,000 US or whatever just to like learn a few of the business principles. Like that's ridiculous. So I created my MBA course for people that just want to learn the material. Like business is the scientific study of how to make money. You know what I mean? All rich people, like people that are like rich, we're not talking like upper middle class, we're talking rich. They all know finance to the degree that you teach it in an MBA, master's level finance. That's how they don't piss their fortune away. You know what I mean? They don't blow it on some scam. They don't get like taken by fraudsters. You know what I mean? They know what to do with it that not only keeps it there, but lets it grow, despite economic conditions, right? Or if you're an entrepreneur, you want to like, you see an opportunity, you want to work for yourself, you have a creative attitude, you have a slightly rebellious attitude, you don't follow the herd, you go and you do your own thing, and you get rewarded for it, you make money, you deliver value to people, and they pay you, and it works out for everybody. But you want to learn marketing or something like that, there are not a lot of great solutions. So anyway, that's why I created the MBA course. So if you're interested in that, yes, check it out. I do have the Get Hired course, which is probably more of interest to people here. And if you're wanting to improve your communication skills and all that kind of stuff, maybe climb the ladder, check out this right here in the description. Links in the description box below. Sky says, breath of fresh air. How do you handle stress? And answer, I handled it well, and then zip it. Yeah, exactly. You see, the problem with that question, the how do you handle stress question, is that the longer you talk about it, the more you're talking about negative things. You're talking about how you get stressed, what you have to do to manage your stress, how it affects you, maybe some stories in the past of how you've been stressed. That's the opposite of what you want to be talking about in a job interview. A job interview, you present yourself as like, yes, I can handle this job. I can do the job. There's no problems. There's no red flags. Everything's fine, right? But now they got you talking about how you get stressed, how things are a problem. It's like the further you go down that rabbit hole, like the more damage you do, right? So you nip it in the bud. How do you handle stress? I actually handle stress very well. You shut the hell up, and the ball's in their court. Now, do they want to ask a follow-up question? But I'm just not going to babble about like how I get stressed. A lot of the time they'll just move on, And then if they do push you, you give an equally curt answer. You say like things like, a certain amount of stress is usually inevitable, but it's never been a problem for me in the past. Right? Time to move on, right? Northern Nomad, I have a strong leading interview at 2 p.m. Wish me luck. Good luck. Stop it says, good luck, Nomad. Sky says, good luck, Nomad. Let us know how you did. Peter, and if I could ever have a coffee chat with you, it would make me even happier. Okay, well, this is the equivalent of a coffee chat. We can talk about whatever the hell you want, Peter. I'm all ears. Sienna says, I'm also in Winnipeg, LOL, switching careers in min and purchasing, switching to credit counseling and seeking employment at age 59. So at 59, you probably know some stuff. You've probably seen some shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're probably a very experienced, very valuable person. It's probably going to take a bit to rile you and to push you out of your comfort zone because you've been there and done it. You've been around the block a few times, you know? So that's a good thing. If people are looking for someone that, you know, they know what they're doing and they've seen it, they're not easily surprised, they pick you. Yeah. Networking. Learn about networking. That's a blanket rule for everybody. I did a poll on my channel. I can't bring it up easily, but it was something like, do you think networking, getting a job through networking, do you think it like doesn't happen? It's a myth? Or do you think it's fair? Or do you it's open to everyone? Or do you think it's unfair? It's an option only available to elites? And I get a variety of answers. The answer, the correct answer is that it is fair because it is open to everyone, right? Now, there are a lot of people out there that have never availed themselves of that opportunity, and they have a problem with other people doing it. The reality is that, if you live in Canada, you live in the United States, you live in many countries in the world, it's a free country. You have the right to talk to anyone you want. You can go up to anyone that has the power to help you, and interact with them. If you are too scared to do this, or you don't know how to do it, you think like, what could I possibly say? Right? Well, maybe this is a learning opportunity for you. You know what I'm saying? The other thing is that, how can I put this? This is prominent in movies. If you're the type of person that watches movies, they've made a lot of movies about a lot of things over the years. Seems strange how they're not really great anymore, but they certainly used to be. But this is showed so many times in movies, and it's whether it's like based on real life, a true story, or some kind of fabrication, some fictional thing. You see it all the time. Look at the story of Apple, for just want of some thing that probably most people are familiar with, It's like you got Steve Jobs going and talking to people, You want money? Okay, let's go talk to a bank. You want, investors? Oh, go talk to investors and see if they'll invest in you. They're not going to invest in you if they don't know you exist. You go up to them and say, hey, I'm doing this. This is why I think it's going to pay off. This is what we're expecting. This is why it's a great opportunity. What do you think? Let me know if you need more information. You can do this kind of thing. A very popular method of job search is called direct outreach. And the great thing about this is that introverts can do it. I don't care how introverted you are. I don't care if you're on the autism spectrum. You can do this. You can sit in the comfort of your home, just being on a computer or like your phone, and you can send messages to the people that could help you, could hire you today. You know what I mean? And basically you say a version of your pitch. Your pitch is, hello, I'm here. I'm great at this. If ever you need someone who can do that for you, let me know. I'd love to work with you. I live close by. I know you guys do great work in this area. If ever you're looking, let me know. Now, the idea is, if you don't know about this, the idea is that like, okay, is everyone looking to hire someone like you right now? No. But some people are, right? I don't care what you do. I don't care where you are. There will be some employers just happening to look for someone like you right now. It could be 1% of all the employers in your industry that are hiring now. It could be 0.1% of all the employers in your industry that are hiring someone like you right now, right? We did a thing on my last, my last live stream where I was showing this to everybody, right? I was saying, like, look, do this as an experiment with me, okay? Go to Google, type in the name of your city or your region, okay? Where you are, right? Then go to maps, right? So you're looking at a map of your hometown. Here's my hometown, right? Now, I've been harping on about accountants. Accountants are not really a great example because every single type of business uses an accountant. Let's do something more specialized. Let's do welding, for want of a better word, right? Let's say I'm a fully qualified welder. I'm looking for work, okay? So I'm going to zoom in to my hometown. I'm going to say this button here, search this area, okay? Here are some potential employers for someone like me. If I'm a fully qualified welder, I'm looking for a job, okay? What's this? Superb Heli Arc Welding. Here's their phone number. Here's their website. Or they normally put a website on here. This one doesn't. Okay, but that's not a good one. Dallas Thompson Welding. I never heard of this. Okay, they don't have a website either. They got a phone number. Anything Custom. Here you go. They've got a website. They got a phone number, right? Okay, so now let me show you something else. Let's say I live in the north end of the city. Now, I don't actually live in the north end of the city. The north end of the city is entirely populated by criminals and idiots and the scum of society. And I really know what I'm talking about here. So the north end of the city, it doesn't look like there's anything much, right? But I've zoomed in. I say, search this area. Bam. It comes up with a whole bunch of other things. Okay, what do we got here? T&R Mobile Welding. Grapco's Welding Services, like somebody's house. Tony's Welding, it's somebody else's house. Merit Iron, Innovair Industry Limited head office, they do welding. Felix Mobile Welding. Welding. You see how many employers there are? Okay, now, if you're on LinkedIn, LinkedIn is another incredible business tool. Imagine you, for each one of these sources, you were to look up each of these sources. What is this? Par Metal Fabricators, okay? So I go to LinkedIn, I do a people search, I confine it by limited to just the Winnipeg area, okay? And I do a search for, what was it? Par Metal Fabricators, okay? I do a people search, so the results are individuals, right? Presumably, the people that would show up on that search are the ones that work at Par Metal Fabricators or who have previously worked at Par Metal Fabricators, right? And you can now look inside each of these businesses or each of these organizations at the individuals. Here's the owner, here's the general manager, here's the head of the welding department, here's some of the welders, right? Okay, so you could do that kind of thing. Maybe the welders won't be on there, but certainly the owner usually will, and the maybe the general manager, right? So like, not only can you discover who they are, but you can also then send them messages and connect with them and all this kind of stuff, right? So put that together with what I said earlier, saying, hello, hey, I'm a fully qualified welder. I've got, expertise in this area. Here's a problem I can solve. If ever you're looking for another welder to join your team, let me know, right? Let me know. I think every time I do this, it resets the, there it is. No, it doesn't. Okay, it keeps all that stuff on the side of the screen. Right, so that's direct outreach. That's networking. Okay, now, if you're young and no one's ever informed you that you can do this, you can. And I would encourage you to learn everything you can about it. This is just one of many types of networking. Networking just means people talking to each other, people communicating with each other. That's all it means, right? So you don't have to know any of these people, right? You're going to reach out to them. Now, most of them, they're probably not looking for welders right now, but I can guarantee you that some of these people are. So if you contact all of them, or as many as you possibly can, and just send them that message, that will fall right into the lap of somebody who's looking for a welder right now. That's the idea. Okay, so this is something you can do. And the beautiful part of this is that you bypass recruiters. You don't have to go through any kind of gatekeeper, So this is the kind of things you can do. So networking can be a very, very, very useful thing. And in this form, you don't have to make a single phone call. You don't have to meet any person at all. The only time when that might happen is if they've said, hey, we might be looking for someone, can you come down? Would you be able to come down and we could maybe talk about it, and see what's up, right? And then it's like, okay, well, maybe I would want to do that, right? Even if you're a raging introvert, you'd be like, okay, I could go and meet someone if they're hiring for someone like me right now and they specifically want to talk to me. They've seen my LinkedIn profile, they know who I am, and they want to bring me in to talk about an employment opportunity. I could go and do that, Where are we here? Jordan Tupper says, this advice is great. Currently wanting to get out of my current job. Well, I wish you all the luck, Jordan. If that's what you're trying to do, then you certainly can. Just go about it in a smart way. Don't do anything rash. Get something lined up first before you jump. Abdullah says, my problem with English or with interviews is that my English is my third language and I find it hard sometimes to find the right word. I also stutter a bit. That you're doing pretty good having a third language, Abdullah. Okay. That's a sign of someone who's awesome. Okay. I speak 2 languages. I can't do a third. I took Spanish for like 1 year. So I can say, my name is Bill. I'm 15 years old. And what else can I say? I can say, I want to buy a dress. And I can say, how is your fence today? We had some trouble removing my dog's head from it. But apart from that, it's working. And that's about it. So if ever you want to have a conversation about that kind of stuff in Spanish, and then maybe do a hat dance, then we have something to talk about. Other than that, I can only do 2 languages. So if you can do 3 and you're interviewing for a job in your third language, that's badass. So already you're doing really well, Abdullah. I'm sure you will find something. It's just a matter of time. In the meantime, I know this is self-evident, but work on your English. Like if that's what you feel is holding you back, like don't give up. Just do a little bit. Practice every day. Practice job interview language. Watch YouTube videos or something that have like job interviews in English. And that's how you pick up like the lingo that you might use in a job interview. True that. Peter says, Bill, can I find you on LinkedIn? I suppose, yeah. I don't just randomly connect to people on LinkedIn. There's no advantage of just like connecting to a ton of people you don't know. So there you go. I mean, we're here. I'm here. You're here. You have the opportunity to ask me anything or to say anything. Let's do it. Like, this is what it's about. There are 26 people here. Thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. This is, if you're wondering about anything to do with job interviews or careers, let's talk about it. In the meantime, check out my courses, especially this one, I imagine is the one that everybody would probably be most interested in. If you want all my advice all in one place, you want to know how to get jobs in the posted job market, but you also want to know how to get jobs in the hidden job market. Essentially, the extension of some of the things I've been talking about today. with direct outreach and other methods. If you want to learn all that with me, check out that course. That's where it's all at in a, very logical, organized sort of way. I lay down all the principles and give you like templates and things like this. So check that out. Link in the description box. We reached the end of the question, so I've got to fill some dead air. Most people don't know that I also have a couple other YouTube channels. I got the Company's Expert 2 and the Company's Expert 3. So go and subscribe to those. The Company's Expert, as you can see, there's more of the job search stuff on the Company's Expert 2. But Company's Expert 3, that's more for like, entrepreneurial type stuff. If you're wanting to do a startup or you're wanting to do a side hustle, bring in some extra money, possibly even investigate replacing your day job, working for yourself. That's really cool stuff. I recommend it to everybody. It's never been easier than it is right now to be self-employed. All the stuff you keep hearing about the, the job market and stuff like that, you don't have to play that game anymore. Learn about entrepreneurship too, if that's kind of what you're interested in. If you're that type of person, it's not for everyone. Just like working a day job is not for everyone, right? Working under someone's thumb your whole life is not for everyone. Being your own boss is not for everyone, but there's a lot of people that it's a really, really great fit, and they really shine in that situation. Yeah, Sky says, didn't know you had other channels. Yep. Yeah, I do. What I've done with them over the years has kind of changed a couple of times, but yeah, I do have other channels. Sky says, your channel helps us take our power back. Absolutely. It's I guess you could look at it like that. It's just the reality that you don't have to bow to these organizations, especially recruiters. They're doing their job. They're not evil. They're doing their job, but it serves them if you believe certain things and if you behave in certain ways. It furthers their goals, right? Not necessarily yours. Like, for example, when you get a job and you do that thing where you negotiate salary, right, or your compensation, that comes up in some way, shape, or form. It might not even be something that you actively discuss, but it occurs, right? You have to have some agreement of what the compensation is going to be, or else it doesn't make sense for you, or it doesn't make sense for them, right? So sometimes people like actively negotiate it, right? They communicate directly back and forth. It's like, I think this number is fair. It's like, no, we can't do that. We can only do this. It's like, well, I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. You need to make it at least this. Like they do that kind of thing. And that really shows you how their incentives are opposite to yours. You want them to pay as much as they possibly can. They want you to take as little as you possibly can, right? So, you know what I'm saying? Like, so if they could implant the thought that you're basically worthless and you should be getting down on your knees and thanking them for giving you this job, because you will never get offered a job this good ever again. There'll never be an opportunity like this for you ever again. So you should just take this, not demand a lot of money for it because you don't want to push your luck, and then never want to leave and want to work really hard enthusiastically at this job because this is the best you could possibly ever do, and never even look to see if there's any other jobs out there that would be better than this one, right? That's what they would want you to believe. And that's the behavior they would want you to have, right? That serves their purpose. You know what I'm saying? But is that the best thing for you? No, of course not. You would want the opposite. You would want, like, I want full and complete information about every employer. I want to know where they are. I want to know how they treat all their employees. Oh, I got a throat thing. Excuse me. You know what I'm saying? That's what you would want. The reality is that you can go anywhere you want. You're valuable, right? But they have a vested interest in putting everyone on one level playing field and comparing them all side by side, right? Making everyone follow rules, making everyone disclose everything about themselves, right? These are all very self-serving things. Now, if you want to work there, you might have to bow to this. Usually you don't. Even if they have an official hiring procedure, you usually don't have to bow to this. The reality is that you can just go talk to anyone in that company. And if, you approach someone who can hire you and you say, look, and they are looking to hire, they've just realized they've got to hire someone. They'd rather just go with you. If you work out and they get along with you and you can do the job, why look further afield? You know what I mean? I definitely have a throat thing. Just excuse me for one moment. Okay, I'm back. Let's see here. Abdullah says, do you find it logical that companies do HR interviews before technical interviews? Yeah. See, the reality is, Abdullah, is that maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but just in case you don't, the reality is that there are many people out there that are technically qualified to do most jobs, right? Finding qualified people from a technical sense is not usually a big challenge. There are exceptions, but usually that's not like the real, point of contention. So for example, when they post a job and they get like hundreds of applicants, right? And then they maybe have like, 700 applicants. And then from that, they shortlist like about, say, 8 people that they're going to interview, right? Now, all 8 on paper are fully qualified to do the job, right? So they could hire any one of the 8 and that person would be able to do the job from a technical point of view. That's not really the deciding factor among those 8. The problem is you can't hire all 8. You can only hire one of the 8. So the problem is you're talking to 8 people that are all qualified. They meet the requirements, whatever the technical requirements are to do the job, these people meet it, right? Now, another logical thing that you might think is that, okay, so therefore they're looking for the most technically qualified person of these 8, right? Well, that's not true. You've heard it said, it's possible to be overqualified, right? So if your skills are way above like what the job requires, they actually are not looking for that. At least recruiters aren't, the way HR, like recruitment and selection, is taught today. They're not looking for that because instead they think, okay, well, that might sound like a good deal, but then you realize that this person is capable of getting jobs that pay far more than this job. So they're not going to stay in this role if you did hire them. That's what we found statistically, right? Now, there are exceptions to everything, but generally that is what we see. If you want, someone to write code or whatever, like to be a developer, there are a lot of qualified developers out there, right? But then you get one candidate that's got like a degree, like a PhD in computer science. They've written papers that have been published all over the world, like discovering new concepts in computer science, right? It's like, yes, they're really qualified, but recruiters know that on average, if they were to offer this developer job to that person would not stay very long because in a short amount of time, they would have found a much higher paying job that's looking for someone with a PhD in computer science. that can pay like 5 times what this job is paying. So that person will be leaving very soon, right? So it's not about finding the most qualified person. That's not the tiebreaker between the 8 people they're interviewing. The whole point of bringing these 8 people in for an interview is to see what they're like as a person, okay? Because if you're technically qualified, but yet nobody can work with you because you're arrogant, you're abusive, you disrespect everybody else, you have no idea how to communicate appropriately, right? And therefore nobody wants to work with you, you're not going to work out as an employee. It doesn't matter how technically qualified you are, it's just not going to work, right? If your boss hates dealing with you, every time they come to give you an instruction, they have an argument on their hands, like a shouting match. They're either going to leave or they're going to fire you. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not going to work. So what they found is that the soft skills, like, your communication skills, your collaboration skills, having a sense of appropriate workplace behavior, things like that. In the real world, those are the things that distinguishes a good employee from a bad employee, right? There's a lot of other things too there. Like if you're the type of person that gets very, very bored very quickly, you're brilliant, but you get bored very quickly and therefore you quit jobs after like 2 months. And if you look at that person's resume, they have a history of quitting every job they've had after 2 months. They easily find another one, but then they quit that one too, right? Once again, it doesn't matter how brilliant you are from a technical point of view. If you quit jobs after 2 months, it's just not going to work out. Excuse me. So this is what they found. This is what they're looking for. So that's what job interviews are really about. That they're looking for red flags in your personality, in your soft skills, right? Maybe you go to the job interview and you get like super offended, like immediately right off the bat because they looked at you funny or something, like, sorry, deal breaker. Like we don't want to work with that person. You know what I mean? We want to work with somebody who's going to be easy to work with, who's going to make us feel better or at least feel neutral about ourselves and not go home every day feeling terrible and angry. Someone who understands how to behave appropriately, somebody who's going to stay, somebody who enjoys this work. You could be qualified in it, but you find it boring. I have a family member who got they got a degree in engineering. They went to work for like a large jet engine manufacturer, being a small cog in a big machine. They quit. They said, that's it. I don't want to do this ever again. They went back to school. They got a PhD in psychology, of all things, and now they're a therapist. A pretty successful one, too, with their own business. It's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if you might be fully qualified to do this work, but if you have no interest in it, you're not enthusiastic about doing it, that's going to be a problem. It's just not going to work out, right? So that's what job interviews are about. They're checking for all that stuff. Right? That's why they can give it to recruiters who technically they don't know anything about the job, but they understand psychology, they understand how to ask questions to reveal certain things about people, or at least they think they do. That's what interviews are about. So, do I find it logical that companies do HR interviews before technical interviews? Yes, that's the reasoning behind it. Sky says, very helpful to know both sides. I wish I knew years ago that interviews were a type of negotiation conversation. Yeah, that's part of it. Certainly when it comes to like salary and things. They want you to be super enthusiastic and dedicated to a really crappy job. They want you to want to stay long term and sell your soul to the company, basically, for like measly pay, or very boring, dead end kind of thing with no opportunities for advancement. it's tough to get. Like, you understand their perspective. They need to fill these roles, and all things being equal, they'd love to get someone who's into this mundane thing. If you can find that person, let's get them. But there's definitely two sides to everything. Like, it's very self-serving behavior. Anzia says, I left my job because of mobbing. Okay. I don't think I can use it as an excuse during the interview with a new potential company. No, you can't, because you're making a first impression, and a first impression is not reality. It's a first impression, right? We all have strengths and weaknesses. We all have good aspects and bad aspects. We all have stories that they can sound bad when we say them, even though they're not bad, even though they're perfectly accurate. Right? Now, what you choose to say in the interview should all contribute to making a good first impression. Then they will look at you longer and take a harder look at you. And then they will have an opportunity to see more of your strengths and what you can bring, right? Rather than just ending it after like the first impression, So unfortunately, that's the problem. If you go in there and the first thing out of your mouth is like, oh, I'm a victim, and these people were oppressing me, and like, that could be perfectly true. But think of what that looks like. You don't know this person. The first words out of their mouth is, I'm a victim. That might not give the best first impression. A reasonable person seeing that and not knowing this person at all might conclude, okay, they have a victim mentality. They seem to be obsessed about being a victim. I don't know if we necessarily want to work with someone like that. It seems like if we let them in here, they're going to accuse us of everything under the sun. They're going to play a victim even when they're not. We don't know, but that's the impression I'm getting. And if I have to make a judgment solely based on this like 5-minute encounter with the person, that's how I'm going to go, Maybe you are a victim, but you don't lead with that. You know what I'm saying? At least not in that way. This is the silly thing. There's a difference between the reality and making a first impression of the reality. You know what I mean? And job interviews are about making a good first impression because they don't know you. For all they know, you could be crazy. You could be lying. You could be a criminal. You could be insane. Like they have no idea. All they have to go on is what you say in, the beginning of your job interview. So that's why you would want to carefully manage what you say, right? To present yourself in the best possible light. Show them all your good aspects that there's no questioning of it. There's no kind of thing that, could be a red flag, right? Marina says, Bill, I have to restart my career in Canada as an entry-level professional. I've applied for marketing, which is my field in admin. My question, how should I present my previous experience on LinkedIn? Marina, why do you have to start all over again, like at the entry level? I don't know your history, but I get the impression that you are not at the entry level, but because you're changing careers, you feel like you have to start at the entry level. Now, sometimes that's true, but a lot of times it isn't. If you have a lot of transportable skills, you've been around the block a few times, you've got a lot of accomplishments under your belt, you've dealt with a lot of people, you've dealt with a lot of types of problems, you've seen a lot of solutions and a lot of good ways of working. You know what I mean? Like, why would you have to start right back at the bottom again? If it's a matter of like tacking on some technical skills, it may be possible to fast track that, So, and then the question is, should I present my previous experiences on LinkedIn? Well, like we could get into it, but I want to say that I don't think that's a concern of yours right now. If you're changing careers, how do people change careers successfully? They don't go through recruiters. They don't go by resumes or LinkedIn profiles. They go through talking to people, right? They go through networking. That's how you change careers and not have to start at the bottom. That's how you move sideways. So you go up and you go sideways, or at least you go up and then you kind of do this, but you don't go up and then go all the way back down to the bottom somewhere else. You know what I mean? You shouldn't, I mean, all things being equal, you shouldn't need to do that. So I'm sorry this is not maybe the answer you're looking for, but I would investigate that, like learn how people actually change careers. Don't listen to recruiters on how to change careers, because people don't change careers going through recruiters. Now, don't take my word for any of this. To go out and try some stuff. Go talk to some professionals in this industry that you're moving into. You're saying you're getting jobs in like marketing and admin. That doesn't really narrow it down what industry you're in, but go and talk to some of the bosses in that industry. Say, hey, could I get your expert opinion on where this industry is going, what your thoughts are on, what the future holds, maybe what skills or what technologies are going to change things, or if they're going to change things. I'd love to be able to get your expert opinion on that. Could you spare me half an hour, of your valuable time? You name the date, time, place, I'll be there. And just go in there, ask people stuff, and one of the things that comes out of those informational interviews is that they, just by the questions you're asking, they can tell that you know your stuff. You have some valuable skills. You might they'll be able to see your enthusiasm for marketing or whatever. And they'll be able to see that you have certain soft skills and things that are very useful. So, you know what I mean? Like, you could become a contender. You could go away for a couple weeks or a week or something and then come back, send them another message, say like, hey, I've been thinking about what you said to me. And, if you ever do decide to act on that thing that you were telling me about, or you're looking for someone to help you with that, let me know, because it's quite exciting. I'd like to work with someone on that. And if you're doing it, I'd love to work with you, something like that. And they may say, hey, let's talk. There might be something. Here's a part-time position, or here's like a thing. You're not starting right at the bottom. You're starting kind of in the middle here. I'm going to take a chance on you. You seem to be enthusiastic about this. You seem to have some skills. You know what you're doing. You know what you're talking about. It's like, right? So investigate that stuff, okay? Where are we here? Marina says, I've always wondered whether I should adapt my LinkedIn according to the field that I'm applying for. How can I do it while applying for two different fields? That's a whole thing, okay? It's like, what's your identity? And it's impossible to say what you should do until you clearly outline who's it for, right? You need to know what the purpose is, what you're going to use it for, before you know what to do with it, right? So, who do you want to be? Do you want to be someone who can do a lot of stuff in the industry you're moving to? Or do you want to keep it open to people in your original industry that, as a fallback option? You know what I mean? Who might be looking at this, and what's the angle? Like, you need to know that first before you just can act. You know what I'm saying? I talk about all this stuff, by the way, in that course. Okay, the Get Hired course. So the first section of that course is like making a killer LinkedIn profile. So, it's straightforward for people that do one thing, right? Like me, for example, I've had a very diverse career. I've worked across 5 industries. So if I was wanting to fix up my LinkedIn profile in such a way that I was going to use it to get a job or something, it would be a little challenging. What do you put as your tagline, right? Do you put the thing that you've done the most of, or do you put the thing that you're going for that's the most relevant, right? So that's where it gets a little unintuitive, and you got to put some thought into these things. That's why it's the first thing in my course, because forcing you to think through your LinkedIn profile and what your image is, your brand, or your perception is going to be, that really frames what you're going to do in your job search campaign. If you're changing careers, are you open to working in your old career, or are you decided you're going to be moving to this new career? Because that affects how you do things. It affects not only your materials like resumes and LinkedIn profiles, it affects what actions you're going to take, what vectors you're going to use to get a job or get an employment opportunity, right? You know what I'm saying? Like all this stuff is related, but you start with that identity. So that's why it's very important to really think hard and get this stuff right, because everything that comes after is going to be based on it. So how do you like that for a non-answer? The reality is I can't really go into it because it's quite complicated. It's not something I can say in 5 minutes. It's quite involved. Like, for example, just doing your LinkedIn profile, that took that first sort of module of the Get Hired course, that's like well over an hour. It's like an hour and a half or something. And that's just the LinkedIn profile. Peter Pan says, oh yes, informational interviews are super efficient, especially for newcomers. Do you mean that literally, or do you mean that sarcastically? The reality is that they are, but the problem is that nobody, at least I've never seen anyone really encouraging kids to do it, or newcomers. You know what I mean? This is not something they teach you in school, unfortunately. You know, and I mean, I've taught this in university. This is what I did the capstone course. I've said this before. I did the capstone course in a postgraduate management program at university, and I made people do this networking activity. I said, you have to go out and you have to get informational interviews with CEOs. Not that hard to do if you know how. But the problem that I encountered when I'm teaching this to 20-somethings is that almost universally, everybody started with the preconceived notion that that can't be done. You just can't do that. Who am I to talk to them? They're way up here on, you know, so like Mount Olympus or something, and I'm down here in the gutter, you know. It's like wrong. How do you think people reach out to companies? Let's say you were a supplier. How do you think that they approach a company? They contact the CEO on LinkedIn. If they don't have a personal connection, never worked with them before, a lot of times you contact them on LinkedIn. You know, if you're floating in very elite, high-level circles, then, you know, yeah, you'd have personal relationships with everybody, right? But that's not how the vast majority of business is done. Most people work in like mid-sized companies. Mid-sized companies are not like up in those circles, you know? So 99% of how this stuff gets done is done with this. You approach the company. Let's reach out to them, you know? So anyway, long story short is that all my students did this, and I taught this course for a couple of years. And, you know, I've said this so many times. It's like I gave bonus marks for if they could bring in a selfie of them with the CEO, you know? And a lot of them did, and a lot of them got offered jobs. And then the final part of that story that I seem to be telling a lot these days was there was one student that the CEO, right in front of her, the CEO handed the director of HR her resume and said, like, look into this person. Right? I mean, there's nothing more powerful than that. What's the director of HR going to do? Say no? You know? You know what I mean? So it's like, that's the power. It's this is what you learn in like business circles. You don't start at the bottom at a company and go up. You start at the top and go down. Like if you're trying to reach out to them, right? Anyway, if you want to learn more about this stuff, I have a video, free video on my channel. I did it about 6 weeks ago. It's called How I'd Get a Job. It's 45 minutes long, and I walk you through 11 different methods of getting a job. So for different people and depending on what you're doing, different methods might resonate with you. So check that out, because I talk about some of these methods there. And if you want to go deeper with me, check out my courses. I don't do, like, I'm not a career coach. I don't work with individuals, coaching them how to do job interviews and stuff. But I provide courses. So for the price of like spending 1 hour with a career coach, you get like a whole course from me. So check out that stuff. I guess that screen was the perfect thing. You've got it all on your screen right there. Links in the description box under this video. And I made videos on each of the courses. So It explains how they work, what you get, all that stuff. So it's as transparent as possible. Check that stuff out if you're interested. I do live streams like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I think I'm going to be taking pretty much most of next week off, actually, for the first time in a while. But I normally do like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm live for a portion of the day. So this is what I do instead of like responding to comments on this channel. I can't really type out long answers, but I can go live and people can ask me questions, and hopefully I'll try and help you out. If you're struggling with something, I can guarantee you many other people are too, and they're hoping that you will ask so they don't have to. Peter says literally. Okay, makes sense. I know the case when a newcomer was created a special position by one famous HVAC company and the whole department for him as soon as they had an informational interview with him and realized his value. Yeah, well, that's an extreme case, but I don't doubt it. It's also a great way to elevate yourself above the crowd. You don't get the job because you're like the absolute brightest person out there, or the most accomplished person, or the most educated person, or the most experienced person. You get the job mainly because you're the only one that showed up who was interested enough to do this. Like that alone distinguishes you. So don't you like that idea? You're already in the lead just by showing up. Very few people do this, especially very few young people do this. But we're all familiar with this idea that recruiters like it when you put volunteer experience on your resumes, right? Why is that? Well, they like it because it shows your true colors. You weren't paid for doing that work. You did it because you wanted to do it. That shows who you are, right? It's not mandatory, it's voluntary, You're not in it for the money if you're volunteering, right? So if you volunteer for something, that must mean that you want to do that, like you enjoy doing it. It shows your true colors, right? In the same way, doing informational interviews with a company or doing networking or like direct outreach, things like that, that shows, apart from the fact that you have initiative, it shows that you must be interested in that company, genuinely interested in working for them, or else why would you be trying to do this? Right? It also is a great way. The thing I love about that stuff in terms of job search is that when you go to a job interview, you're talking about all the great stuff you have and you can do, right? You're not demonstrating it. They don't give you a chance to demonstrate it. Right? They want you to talk about it convincingly, right? The thing with this networking type stuff is that you're demonstrating what you have. So when you reach out to someone to say do an informational interview, they're getting a free sample of how persuasive you are, how professional you are, what your communication skills are like. Do you guys get along? Do you click? Are you easy to deal with? There's like a whole slew of soft skills that you are demonstrating. You're not just talking about how you have them. You're showing them that you have them. And when they respond, that's like a confirmation that they think you're professional. They think you're persuasive. They think you're genuine, and so on, right? If ever you've been frustrated by how job interviews with recruiters rely on you talking about how you have stuff rather than being able to show anything, this is a partial solution for that. Tori says, can I get a job on LinkedIn and never got an interview? Well, that's almost a sentence. Can you get a job on LinkedIn if you never got an interview? People are interesting things, and there's all kinds of strange and wonderful people out in the world, and there are some people that will give you a job without requiring you to do a job interview. Yeah. But that's not the norm. It can be done. Everything happens some of the time, but that's not typical, right? Usually they require you to give an interview first. That's, that's standard, right? Peter says, exactly. Volunteering in Canada was the first thing I put on my resume when I was hunting for my first position in this country, and my first references I got were from the companies I volunteered for. Yeah. There's the problem is that there's a limit to volunteering. Like legally, only certain companies can legally have you volunteer, right? Because if all companies could have volunteers, then that would be a loophole around things like the minimum wage law, right? Like minimum wage rules. You can't have someone work for you for free. So the problem is volunteering. There's only very specific things that legally they're allowed to have volunteers for, right? So you can't just volunteer like doing welding or something. I'm young. I've never had a welding job before, but I've just come out of welding school. Here, you don't have to pay me anything. I'll volunteer and weld just to get some experience down. Write me some references and letters of recommendation. You can't do that, unfortunately, right? You can work in like charities and you can do certain specific things, but you can't just volunteer for anything. That's the reality. And I believe in the United States, it's exactly the same. Same way it works. So there you go. Anyway, there are 20 people here. Thank you for being here. I have to sign off this live stream now because I have another live stream that's scheduled to start in like 2 minutes on my channel. So I'll be gone for a minute and then I'll be back on my channel again in a minute with a different live stream. So if you want more, come and check me out on the new live stream in a minute. It starts in a minute, okay? So thanks to everybody who participated in here. I hope to see you in a couple of minutes. But if I don't, just know that you're awesome, you're employable, you're going to be fine, okay? And if ever you need some questions asked, come back. See you soon.